Okay, well, welcome everybody. This is next up in our LinkedIn Makeover series, and today I have my colleague Aden Heuser here with me. So thank you, Aden, for your willingness to go through your LinkedIn profile. I'm actually going to go ahead and share my screen right now to bring up Aden's profile here. And before we began, I had asked Aden kind of how what you wanted to have taken away. For if people were reading your profile, what kinds of information would you want them to know about you? And you had said several keywords, strategic, collaborative, scrappy, and results driven. And so that's kind of the focus that I'm going to be coming from in giving you feedback. Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay, perfect. So what I usually will always start with is the profile picture. And so you actually have a really cool picture there. The only suggestion that I would have for you, Aden, is typically what we want is your face to fill about 75 to 80% of the frame, just because when people land on your profile, especially if they're looking at it on their mobile phone, then they want to be able to see your face. And you actually have your picture zoomed out a little bit. So if you have the ability to zoom in on that picture, then that would be great. That crops in a little bit more around your face as opposed to all of the background. Or if there's a different picture that you want to swap it out for, that just has a little bit of a closer up on your face, then people can actually kind of see who you are a little bit more easily. So, but all things said, that is a nice picture because the lighting is good, the resolution is good, and those are definitely things that you want to also keep in mind. The other thing that you have this great opportunity for is the background cover image. And so that's this piece, right back here. And you have the default, kind of the LinkedIn default, but what is a best practice there is to go and search for an image that you could put in that section, because you have the ability to edit that space and add an image. And so for you, you might be looking at looking for images that might to you represent strategy or strategic. You might be looking for something that might be showing kind of collaboration and what you might think about that. I'm not sure you'll find one that represents scrappy, but results driven for sure might be one. There's two sites that are actually really helpful for that. One is Canva, Canva, and they actually have pre-sized images for the different social media platforms and pictures that have free licenses. And then the other one that has open licenses for lots of images, a place called Pixabay, Pixabay. That one you'd have to size the images yourself, but typically that would be a lot of resources there. So that might be something that you could find a good picture, because that'll catch people's eye much more than just the generic background.
Do you know, hey Julie, do you know on the mobile device if the image you select for the banner here displays in the same way, or if there's any sensitivity?
It depends on, that's a great question. You want to optimize for mobile. I forget what the statistics are, but it's probably like 75 to 80% of people are initially looking at the LinkedIn profile from their mobile phones. Typically for an image itself, it might not be that important, but if you ended up picking a background that has words, like if you look at my LinkedIn profile, I have a sentence or words on my profile, and I actually did need to kind of adjust the sizing so that all the words showed on mobile. But if you're just choosing an image without any words on it, you shouldn't have too many problems with that. The only tip, like for you, like if you went with something with collaborative, if you choose people in the background, then you want to make sure that they're kind of blurry, or that you can't really see like collaborate, like a team looking at the camera, because essentially then you have a bunch of people in your background image that are competing for, we want people to land and look at your profile picture, not necessarily the people in the background picture. So that's why it's good if they're kind of blurred out, or a little bit not as crisp and clear. So that's just another thing to think about. Aden, the other thing that you have the opportunity to do is to update your headline. So right now, your headline has defaulted, which is the typical LinkedIn default, to your most current job title. And so what I recommend in this section is the easiest thing for people to do is to pick like keywords. So even you have strategic, so that could be strategic program management. It could be collaborative teamwork. It could be scrappy and results driven. Like even just that tells more about you than senior program manager. And so that also will have you pop up in like if there's keyword searches that either hiring managers or recruiters or other people are doing on LinkedIn, then you may show up in some of those searches, which is great. So that is a great opportunity with the headline. And then for the about section, what you have is great that you've filled in some content here. One of the things that I recommend that people think about when they're looking at the about section is that they think about it like an online conversation. And so what that means is that it's ideal if you actually write it in first person instead of third person, because like yours is written in third person, which is what most people actually do. But if you write it in first person, then it's friendly. And then I'm kind of, oh, let me get to know Aden and what's her background and what's her story. On the about section, I recommend like a 5-step, I call it like a 5-step recipe. And you have some of this in here already, but I'll share with you what that is, and then you can think about whether you want to update some or all of your about section with this. So the first step is to have what I would call a point of view. And so like that is catchy because most of the time people are going to have to click more. And if you have a catchy sentence like, I believe that the best program managers should be both strategic and scrappy. That would be like, oh, that's interesting. So that's your point of view. And so it's curious, it catches people's attention. And then they want to know more because that is an interesting way of kicking things off that has me, you've piqued my curiosity. And then once you've piqued my curiosity, I'm going to want to read more about you. So then the second step in this is to tell a quick bit of your background, which is a little bit of what you've done here. This is where I started. This is where I'm, my job history, etc., what I've done in my work. And then the third step is to add what I like to call a greatest hit, or a success or an achievement that you received in one of your jobs. And that can just be as simple as, one of the things I'm the most proud of is X. And so it's not that you're bragging, but you are calling out something that you specifically accomplished. And that's really good because it definitely ties into results driven that you wanted people to know you for. And then the third step is then to go into, first is the point of view, second is a bit of the background, third step is the accomplishment or this greatest hit, and the fourth is to then talk about kind of where you are now and what you're doing now. And you kind of got a bit of that in there right now, so you might just break up that first paragraph a bit to talk about where you are and what you're doing now. And then the fifth step you actually do have already, and that's a listing of skills, specialties, competencies, etc. Because this is really good to have because these are also keywords that people would search for. So that's just some feedback on how you might be able to up-level your about section and make it compelling and kind of have a hook for people to want to know more about you. Any questions on that?
So with regards to kind of optics of like the steps 1 through 4, is there any phrasing or framing visually in that section that you recommend, or is it, because you had said, hey, break out number 4 into potentially a different paragraph, but do you find that section is generally 4 separate paragraphs, 2 or 3 paragraphs?
I do find it to be better if you break it apart. That's a great question. Because most of the time what's going to happen is that people are scanning. They're not reading, they're scanning. And so like, for example, the step number 1 is the point of view. That's its own sentence. And then there's a space. And then step number 2 is a bit of your background. I started here when I was just out of university, or my first job was, and that might be a couple or a few sentences, and that's its own paragraph.
Okay.
And then there's space. So the more that you can break out, You actually have a lot of real estate to use in the about section, but the more that you can break it out into shorter paragraphs, the better, because it's easier for people to consume and read that way.
And do you find the about section is where most people will spend the majority of their time? If they,
It depends. Like if it's a recruiter, they may read your about section. They probably would spend more of their time on the experience,
okay.
potentially. But what the about section is the only section on your LinkedIn where you have the ability to let your personality and your communication shine, your story. It's the only place where you have the opportunity to communicate your story. All the other sections are set in terms of what you can and can't add to them. And so this is the one place that allows you to show your personality. So if I was a hiring manager and I wanted to know more about you, yeah, I would absolutely read that because I want to know who you are. And this about section is one of the places that allows us to communicate who we are as well. Does that make
Okay,
sense?
it does.
Cool.
Totally. Yeah.
And then you've got your experience section, which is great. One of the things that you might want to think about in here, it's awesome that you have like a short paragraph of what you've done under every job, or at least most of your jobs you do. A couple of ideas that you could add in the experience section is make sure, if you want people to know you as strategic, collaborative, scrappy, results driven, make sure that some of the words that you're choosing in those paragraphs that describe your job, that you're incorporating the word strategic, like strategic planning or collaborative partnerships or things like that. Like you're incorporating those words so that if I read through it, I'm taking that away. I see a connection between like your headline keywords and then what you've done in your work too. The other thing that you can do, especially because you want to be known as results driven, is that you can actually break out bullet points underneath your jobs and use like 1 or 2 bullets to list some key accomplishments or some key results that you were able to achieve in that particular role. And that's a great way, both visually of being able to quickly see the things that you did, but also be able to align with kind of what you want people to take away. So that can be helpful. Education is awesome. No changes there. You've got your licenses and certifications. That's fantastic. Yeah, obviously, if there's any new ones, you can continue to update this section. And then in the skills and endorsements, what your LinkedIn profile is defaulted to is organizational development, program management, and change management. Are those the 3 things that you most want to be known for?
Not necessarily.
Okay,
Yeah,
most people say that. Most people, that's exactly what they say. So you can actually edit this section so that you're taking some of these top ones down off of the top 3 and you're moving things up. Like you might want to put strategic management or strategic planning as one of the key skills. And then people will start to endorse you for those once they're in that top 3 lineup. So you can edit this section to make it represent the top skills, because most people are not going to click show more. They're just going to glance at what's actually on here. And then you've got the recommendations, which is great, and that you have 9 recommendations. This is fantastic. One thing that you could consider doing is to get some newer ones, because these ones are from 2005, or sorry, 2015. And so if you get the rule of thumb on this is to, ideally you probably want to have at least 1 or 2 every 6 months to keep it fresh and current. And just know that if you're willing to reciprocate, that most people are really willing to put a LinkedIn recommendation, especially if you're willing to reciprocate for them. So that's a nice way of like getting more like, I'll write one for you. You can write one for me if you've worked together. The other thing that you don't have on here, and that you can just see whether or not this is applicable to you, is that there's a section on the LinkedIn profile for accomplishments. And that can span all the way from key projects you worked on, languages you speak, awards you might have won. Like there's a whole section that's called accomplishments. And you can take a look at that section and see if there's some things that are applicable that you might want to add that are offered in that section, especially because I'm kind of teeing into this results driven. That's a really great section to have, just so I can really take away like, wow, okay, she's had a lot of accomplishments. I can see the results that she's been able to accomplish and to produce in her career. So take a look and see if that section you could add on. The other one that you don't have on here, and if it's applicable, you could add on volunteer. Like, do you do any volunteer work? Are you on any boards or anything like that at this point or in recent
Not
years?
at this point. Historically, yeah, very active, but at this point, not as active.
Okay, and that's all right. You can choose whether or not you want to add that section. You know, if it's work that you've done, I'd say in the last 5 years, you still could add it in if
Okay.
you wanted to. It's that's a nice way of just revalidating some of these key things, you know, like the collaboration, especially if some of the nonprofit work you did was kind of for some scrappy organizations that were really you know, gritting it out and doing great work in the community. So that can be really, really nice for you. And sometimes people will just tee off of like, oh, I've been involved with that volunteer organization too. So sometimes there can be a connection made just from that. So you can decide if you want to add that in.
Okay.
And then the last piece is just down in the bottom here. Here we go with the interests. So this is the piece where you just think about the companies that you are following, and are they in alignment with kind of strategic, collaborative, results driven, and you know, kind of the companies that you want to be following, the ones you want to get the news feeds for. And so you can edit this section by following key thought leaders or unfollowing key organizations or groups. So that is something there. And the only other thing that we didn't talk about yet, Aden, is the activity section. So I wanted to scroll back up to that. And so on the activity, the more active that you are, like even if you're in there several times a week, commenting, which it looks like you are, and that's great because of course, every time that you're commenting and adding thoughts, then that you're showing up in people's feeds. But also you can be intentional about the kinds of articles that you share or things that you post or posts that you comment on. Because what you want to be doing is thinking about creating a theme of kind of strategy or a theme of collaborative people that are showing examples of great collaboration and the results that came out of that. Or maybe a really great post that someone had about a really scrappy organization that just did amazing work. And so these are another way that you can actually help to solidify this theme that people may be taking away for you.
Great.
So that kind of just rolls down. We've gone from top to bottom. Let me just pause there and see, are there any other questions that you have at this time?
Yeah, no, actually I do. So to what extent should your LinkedIn profile basically represent the majority of what's on your resume versus leaving some content for a resume? So what is your kind of guidance on that?
I would say that would be the one section where you theoretically could do a copy and paste. I wouldn't recommend copy and pasting everywhere else, but in the experience section, you can. My rule of thumb on the experience is to have like wherever the natural cutoff is for your job, somewhere between 15 and 20 years of experience.
Okay.
You don't have to write, if you've been in the workforce for longer than 20 years, you don't have to kind of write every job that you had, like when you were 20 years old or whatever. But you also want to have just this nice balance. Like in your experience section, you've got a nice paragraph. The only add that you could incorporate is some key bullet points with some key accomplishments or results that you had in your jobs. And so that I would say is optional. You certainly can copy and paste. You just don't want it to be like a half a page long for every job.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Okay.
Excellent. Okay. Well, Aden, it was absolutely a pleasure. I hope that this was helpful for you, and I'll look forward to seeing your updated profile sometime very soon.
Great. Well, thanks, Julie, for the time. I appreciate it and all the recommendations you made. They've been
All
great.
right. You are so welcome. Thanks.
Bye.
Maybe.